I was just recently trying to find the latest numbers of IPs, and similar to the situation with UN numbers on humanitarian need, we don't seem to have any reliable sort of current estimates on the number of IDPs from the Amhara conflict. And so Yirga, you have the big task of sharing with us what is happening in Amhara, and your views on sort of the situation more broadly. And I turn it over to you.
Someone from a human rights background, my interest is the experience of people. Often analysis about conflicts are presented by making politicians and institutions the units of our analysis, focusing on what numbers and statistics, but the human story behind it, the actual suffering of the people is often ignored. In that regard, I share the sentiment about the suffering of the Tigray people, the human rights violations that happened in Tigray. I myself had opposed the war, as many Amharas did. And that is a heartbreaking situation. The Pretoria peace agreement is good that it brought some sense of relief in Tigray. But I want to emphasize on a few pointers, especially seeing the Pretoria Agreement as a peace deal and something that would resolve the conflict in Ethiopia as for me, a very dangerous approach to the situation in Ethiopia. I say this because in the Pretoria deal, the Amharas, which were part of or affected by the situation in the war in Tigray and Amhara and Afar, were excluded deliberately while they were ready to participate in it. The insistence to implement that deal is to further marginalize and make Amharas voiceless. And it is also, it will also result in further creating friction and fusion between Amharas and Tigrayans. There are contested territories between the Amhara and the Tigray people. These people have lived together for centuries before the rise of ethnic nationalism in Ethiopia. Once in our past history, the Amharas and the Tigrayans used to speak the same language, the Giz language. I grew up in Lalibela, where Aksumite kings have built churches. Amhara, Lalibela and others also doing the same in Tigray and other parts of the country. We have a very strong connection, and there hasn't been such a problem in our past. The crisis between the two regions have been created as a consequence of the political crisis that is created and has to be resolved by the involvement of these people. But the active silencing, disregarding, and exclusion of the Amharas will result in creating future violence and war between Tigray and Amhara. And I think the international community, especially the United States and others who are actively supporting the Pretoria deal as a peace maker, while they also know quite well that the Amhara are part of that issue, is really a very dangerous approach, and I hope everyone would revise that and consider Amharas as essential ingredient, part and parcel of that process. Having said that, I think it is also important for me to reflect on what is happening in the Amhara region at the moment. As someone growing, I was born and raised in a town of Lalibela. I hope most of you understand that holy, righteous place. I studied how to write poetry and philosophy from the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church scholars in that church. I learned how to respect my neighbors who would come to visit the churches, wash their feet when they come. The villages in Lalibela were called in different Ethiopian ethnic languages. For example, we have a place called Hadish Adday, which means like new mother in Tigrinya. We have a place called Takko, which means one in Lalibela. This is a place that instilled in me a sense of respecting other cultures and religions in the country. And I grew up as an Amhara in that place. But today, my people, the Amhara people, are actively subjected to different forms of violence that has not been paid attention to, especially by so many who should have done a better job. For example, Just the recent BBC News report has documented and shown that since 2023, in just 43 health institutions, 2,697 women were subjected to rape. And out of this, 1,213 were children under the age of 18. The victims are as young as 8 and as old as 65. According to UNICEF, 4.4 million children in Amhara region have been out of school for more than 3 consecutive years due to this military campaign that is happening after the Pretoria deal. According to the Human Rights Watch, Ethiopian security forces have committed widespread attacks, amounting war crimes against medical professionals, patients, and health facilities. Amhara elected representatives, journalists, and activists who publicly oppose the violence were targeted and arrested. The Honorable Christian Tadele, for example, Amhara representative in the House of Representatives, Yohannes Boyalo, journalist Maskarem Aberra, Gannet Asmamau, Gobezi Sisai, Wondosen Asefa, Tadios Tantu, and others are among the many thousands Amhara voices that are arrested on terrorism and other charges. Most Amharas did not participate in the recent election. These atrocities against civilians are countless, and they extend to assaults on foundations of their ancient Orthodox Christian churches. Monks, priests, and their disciples have been randomly killed in different parts of the country. For example, on the 25 May 2023, government forces bombarded the ancient Debre Elias Monastery, which was established in 1474. According to the European Center for Law and Justice, I quote, of the 600 monastery residents, approximately 570 were killed or injured. The monastery was deserted, with surviving residents forced to flee. On 8 March 2026, government forces attacked with heavy weapons the 15th century Atronesa Mariam and killed 7 Orthodox Christians and their priests who were attending Mass. The church was built in 1468 by Emperor Ba'da Mariam. In RC zone, for example, the violence against Orthodox Christian civilians, many of them Amhara, shows a sustained and escalating pattern rather than isolated attacks. From October 2025 to June 2026, reports by Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the Amhara Association of America, and others documented repeated killings, attacks inside churches, the killing of priests and worshippers, beheadings and burning of homes, farms, and churches. The violence intensified around June 2026 election when the 101-year-old church, St. Gabriel Church, was burned on election day. This pattern points to targeted communal and religious violence that has received far too little international attention. Now, I cannot go on explain the details of these atrocities, but I just wanted to emphasize on a point of why this violence, which is really gruesome and brutal, is happening in Amhara with little international attention, and why are the Amhara people especially targeted within the Ethiopian political system and history. And I think it is really important first to understand how the Ethiopian state has been established since 1991. Since 1991, the Amhara have never had any political power in Ethiopia. In 1991, when Ethiopia was re-established as an ethnic-based system, the Amhara came out of, and other Ethiopians came out of, the 17 years of the Derg's brutal regime that killed the Emperor Haile Selassie and all his elected officials, that take all their land and made land the property of the state. And after the killing of all monarchical leaders and their taking of their properties, after 17 years of this violence, the Amhara people were invented politically as the ethnic enemy of all other groups in Ethiopia. And this history must be really understood very well. Ethiopia's major political actors still now, to TPLF and OLF and others, use the language of liberation fronts inherited from radical Marxist-Leninist ideology of the 1960s and the 1970s. The TPLF and OLF cast themselves still as liberators of ethnic nations from alleged Amhara domination. The Amhara is invented as a necessary enemy so that these political entities continue to claim that they are liberators of their own people. Whether the old imperial leaders were Amharas or Tigrayans, They were massacred and killed throughout the 17 years of the Derg period. There was no an Amhara ethnic class or group that had power from whom that power can be taken. But this narrative was politically convenient because Ethiopian leaders, including the present ones, use the Amharic language for their administrative purposes. But after 1974, and especially after 1991, as I said earlier, the Amharas did not have any political power. Yet the TPLF retained especially the Marxist-Leninist and ethno-nationalist frame, recasting Amharas as the historic enemies of Ethiopia's ethnic nations. Since 1991, Amharas have been branded Nefteñas, settlers, and colonizers, while killings, displacement, and dispossession against them have too often gone unmonitored and unaddressed. The Oromo Liberation Front and related narratives deepen this framing even further by depicting Amharas as colonizers. In Oromia, Amharas have often been labeled as settlers, excluded from meaningful political participation, and denied services in their own language. Since 1991, decisive state power has rested largely with elites from Tigray and Oromia, not with Amharas. Yet Amharas are still treated as a dominant political class. A new prosperity party narrative now appears to cast the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as an obstacle to national prosperity. This echoes the TPLF's earlier demonization of Amharas as enemies of other ethnic group sovereignty. Ethnic and religious demonization are now reinforcing each other, heightening the danger of further mass violence. With Amhara voices imprisoned, electoral participation restricted, humanitarian access denied, and violence ongoing, Amharas cannot have a meaningful political future unless their agency is recognized. A state order that treats Amharas as enemies while denying them representation and equal citizenship cannot produce peace. For this, I think the first responsibility of countries like the United States and the wider international community should be that the Amhara question must be fully understood. Amharas do not need another Pretoria-style deal that ends elite conflict while excluding affected communities. They need a decisive rejection of ethnic nationalist ideology that cast Amharas as enemies and made violence against them politically permissible. The Amhara crisis is rooted in long-term ideological demonization. Amharas have faced massacres, displacement, mass arrest, sexual violence, attacks on healthcare and education, electoral exclusion, religious attacks and denial of political agency, despite lacking decisive state power. International silence is dangerous. Unless a portrayal of Amharas as Ethiopia's enemy is openly rejected and dismantled, which is now represented in songs, in statutes, in constitutions, in many parts of Ethiopia. Ethiopia risks further atrocity, state fragmentation, and regional destabilization. The TPLF and OLF and other political actors must publicly renounce narratives that cast Amharas as historic enemies. Framing an entire people as enemies, settlers, colonizers, or obstacles to prosperity is a recognized pathway to genocide. Therefore, the US and international community should understand the Amhara crisis as a question of political demonization, exclusion, dispossession, and denial of agency, not merely as a security dispute over territory or a localized rebellion. International actors should publicly reject narratives that portray Amharas as historic enemies, colonizers, and settlers. The Ethiopian government should create conditions for peace and reconciliation with all parties, not just with few ones. There has been attempts to negotiate with the Tigray, the war in Tigray and Oromia, but no genuine attempt has been undertaken to engage the Amharas. And the Amhara forces as well have to engage in a meaningful dialogue and conversation with all parties without relinquishing the legitimate demand of the Amharas not to be seen and demonized in their own countries as settlers and enemies. And I think if we are to take this approach, which centers people's exclusion, demonization, and otherness, the solution for Ethiopia will not be far away from being realized. Without this, Ethiopia will further enter into an ongoing violence, discrimination, and possible genocide against the Amhara people. Thank you.
Thank you, Yirga. We've run out of time. I don't know if we have time for a final question. I will take the sort of prerogative of the moderator, not seeing any other questions. Yirga has just shared his recommendations, I think, for the United States. If our other speakers have thoughts, we've been in a process, U.S. With the Trump administration, following on the heels of the Biden administration, of re-engaging with the Ethiopian government in 2023. The Biden administration lifted some of the restrictions on foreign assistance and on U.S. support for Ethiopia, the international financial institutions. And then most recently, last month, or in May, the Trump administration lifted the arms embargo restrictions on licensing for arms transfers, defense transfers to Ethiopia. The restriction prohibiting the trade benefits under the African Growth and Opportunity Act is still in place. Last year, the Trump administration, the State Department under the Trump administration, included for the first time Ethiopia on the list of countries using child soldiers, but it waived the restrictions fully under those sanctions. So that's sort of the state of U.S. policy. There were recent bilateral discussions. There has been talk by U.S. officials of new investments in Ethiopia. Recommendations from our speakers for things that Congress, you'd like to see Congress do, if you can do it in like a minute.
Can I just one point, Lauren, because I'm sorry, I might have spoken a little bit longer, and since most of you seem to have a kind of similar concern, which also I share, the concern that war may broke out again involving Tigray. But that concern comes while another war is still waging and we're not paying enough attention to it. And as I increasingly hear this, as much as I very much respect and love the people of Tigray, and I don't want any harm to happen there, but the emphasis only on one aspect of the war is somehow putting a sense of disposability and being unwanted in this type of forums among the Amhara, including myself. And I really resent this sentiment which is created within a lot of Amharas whenever people are coming, talking about the conflict in Ethiopia, the Amhara is always excluded. And I wonder if any of you would have any suggestion, any idea what to happen in relation to the conflict in Amhara, because you have said and recommended so many things about, and genuinely and rightly so, about the conflict in Tigray, whereas much numerous people, 4.4 million Amhara students out of school, up to 22,000 Amharas killed, 950, more than 950 had been injured, and so much atrocities happening under a political ideology that demonizes Amhara. The inability to say a word and utter moral and political sentiment and injecting that into the politics of the day is really troubling. And it's an ongoing message which tells to Amhara that we don't have a place where disposable, no one will listen to us. And the only solutions Amharas have is to find a way for themselves. And I think this is a very dangerous lesson, which your organizations probably or others should really think about, to reconsider the Amhara concerns and voices, which is historical, not started today, but since the Derg period or since 1991. Amharas are represented by amputated hand and breast, and songs and statues exist that demonize Amharas. And I really urge you to help a lot of Amharas not to lose complete hope from the international actors like yourselves, which are trying parts of our people in Ethiopia, and I hope you will do the same in relation to Amhara. And I just want to say that, and with all due respect, and hopefully also preventing the war in Tigray while resolving the actual war that's also happening in Amhara. Thank you.
Thank you.